next scripture reading comes from Matthew's Gospel, chapter 20, verses 1 through 16. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for the usual daily wage, he sent them into his vineyard. When he went out about 9 o'clock, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And he said to them, "You also go into the vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. When he went out again about noon and about 3 o'clock, he did the same. And about 5 o'clock, he went out and found others standing around, here idle all day. And he asked them, "Why are you standing here idle all day?" They said to him, "Because no one has hired us." He said to them, "You also go into the vineyard." And when evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his manager, "Call the laborers and give them their pay, beginning with the last and then going to the first." When those hired about 5 o'clock came, each of them received the usual daily wage. Now when the first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received the usual daily wage. But when they received it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, "These last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat." But he replied to one of them, "Friend, am I doing you no wrong? Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to his last the same as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or are you envious because I am generous? So the last will be first, and the first will be last." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So this parable of the vineyard workers and landowners, one that is often quoted or cited or mentioned. I'm sure many of you have probably heard it before, and if you've heard it for the first time, well, congratulations, it's a good one. I like that parable. It's a nice little parable, and we have kind of some assumptions and preconceived notions that we might have about that. So I'd like to kind of hopefully expand our horizons to see this parable in a little different light than what we're used to. You see, sometimes with Scripture we read and we jump to conclusions, or what many people refer to as assumptions, and what they can mean and how they can influence our thoughts and understanding in many different ways. We'll try to tackle that today. So there was a saying that I recently stumbled upon during my weekly readings that kind of got my attention. It's one that I had not heard before. The saying was, "Assumptions are planned resentments." Assumptions are planned resentments. Meaning whenever we assume anything, we set ourselves up for possible disappointment, or even worse, we set the other people or places or things up as the object of our disappointment or resentment or anger. So what a true statement that is. Assumptions are planned resentments. I'm sure many of you have also heard the other saying for assuming, but it's not good enough to use in church, so we'll just keep it at that. But assumptions are planned resentments. And that really kind of hits home and makes me think of a lot of different situations and scenarios where that is the truth. You see, I'm sure most of us have had that experience or continue to maybe have some assumptions that we carry around with us. A perfect example is when we assume that our friend or our spouse will clean up around the house, and they don't. We get a little resentful or disappointed. When we assume that our friend is going to be here, as they said they'd help us with our wooden bench project we've been wanting to tackle for months on end, and they don't show, we're disappointed, or maybe even, again, resentful. And so, similarly, we can also make the same assumption with our children, our grandchildren. We assume that they'll know they have to go to the restroom, they have to brush their teeth, they have to put on their pajamas. It's the same thing we've been doing for the past 327 days. And when they don't do it, we get disappointed. We just have these assumptions about life, that if they don't come true or they're wrong, then we harbor resentment or get disappointed. And so the first laborers that were hired that day had the assumption that if more people were hired after them, that they would get pay that was comparable to the work that they had done. And so the initial laborers, as any other person would have likely have figured, the fair thing would be to pay someone based upon the amount of work that they did or the hours that they worked. That's pretty much how it functions in this country, right? Some people work for an hourly wage. Others have contracts that are agreed upon by both parties. Some of us work for a salary. It's all understood and equitable in that fashion. But with these laborers, they came to find out that they made the wrong and false assumption. So when the landowner did not do as they had expected the landowner to, in fact, do, they left with resentment, a bitterness, a frustration, and great disappointment. It felt unfair. They did all of this work. They've been working since 9 o'clock. It's hot. The sun's probably scorched their skin. And they got paid just as much as the other people that were sitting around all day in town and only worked for an hour. So by their assumption that everyone would be paid accordingly, and that didn't happen, they felt a little disappointed and slighted. And so if we ever go into any situation or scenario or interaction with someone with any kind of assumption, we are assuredly bound to build up some resentment somehow or some way, or have some disappointment affect us. In fact, I've seen this firsthand a couple of times in my life, and to paint kind of a vivid picture, we'll go back to my high school days once again. I was a senior in high school, and we were taking the dreaded 4x4 class system, which meant a 4 90-hour, or not 90-hour, not that long, 90-minute classes each day. So we had time for 4 classes. So I found out I only had to take 6 classes my senior year thanks to the credits that I had. I only was required to do 6. And I could graduate with a lighter load my senior year. What a great opportunity, I thought. I was so excited about this. I ran home. I told my mother, I said, "Mom, is it okay if I just sign up for 6 classes? Don't worry. I'll still graduate and everything. It'll be fine. But they're saying I have to take less than what's prescribed." I said, "Son, no. You have to take all 8 classes." "Well, okay. But why?" I said, "Well, we're getting a free education, so go and learn and enjoy that time. And I don't want you causing too much trouble with all that free time you might have." So, yeah, I wasn't a big troublemaker, but those are some of the stuff she said. So, okay, that makes sense. So fast forward to 2 years later, my sister is now a senior in high school, exact same boat, only can take 6 classes instead of 8 her senior year. And she comes and tells me how excited she is about this. I said, "Good luck with that one." So I posed that same offer. I got rejected and shot down. Sure enough, the next day she goes to my parents and says, "Is it okay if I take 6 classes instead of 8 this my senior year?" "Sure, honey, do whatever you want." Wait, what? What in the world just happened? How is that fair? I was, needless to say, a little resentful, bitter, disappointed. You see, I assumed that the rule that applied to me would also apply to my sister. That was my assumption about that fact of life. And when that didn't come true, you could see where I was a little upset. To be honest, maybe harbored a little jealousy or envy for that situation. But how often do we find ourselves in a position of resentment and jealousy in life? In fact, I was talking with this about this very subject with some people this past week. We need to celebrate the good stuff that we have, the joys and the good things that we have in life. We don't do that anymore. We have birthday parties, we have graduation parties, but when it comes to true, genuine celebrations, those seem to be few and far between. We're not happy if someone else is successful or finds something joyful for them in their life. We maybe harbor resentment, jealousy, envy, or what have you. We become a little bitter towards someone, a friend, or a company when they find good fortunes for themselves. So we must ask ourselves, why are we so envious of other people or someone else's gifts or talents, abilities, possessions, or status, and so on? And why do we continue to do that? I belong to a couple of social media groups, and With this Hurricane Irma passing by fairly recently, there was a small contingent of people that were complaining that they didn't have power for a couple days and they didn't see the Duke Energy trucks out about trying to fix stuff. And I thought to myself, are you serious? Have you seen the people in Puerto Rico? The people that don't have homes anymore? And they might not have power for 6 months to a year. They're having major water and food and shortage issues. You need to be grateful that your house is still standing, right? Be thankful for that. The Israelites were complaining in the desert and the wilderness saying, oh, it'd be better if we had just stayed in Egypt and died, as opposed to being out here and being hungry. Really? You guys aren't grateful for God getting you out of that enslavement that you had in Egypt? We need to be thankful. To be grateful for what we have, the gifts that we have, and who we are as people. But I feel the disconnect there kind of lies in those assumptions. See, the first laborers, when they were hired, assumed that their pay would be greater for starting earlier in the day. Then when the other workers were hired and they were paid the same amount and worked a lot less time, they were understandably a little disappointed. But I think we sometimes, too, make those assumptions with God, right? Sometimes we assume that belief in God means we're immune to disease or disasters. But sometimes we assume that we will get preferential treatment due to our status as a faithful Christian. But sometimes we falsely assume that because our faith is stronger and has been present longer with God, we are assured a spot in heaven or better furniture when we get there. Might have a softer love seat or more gold on our windows and doors, as opposed to someone that maybe just met God and they'll have a little thatch hut, but they'll still be in heaven, but it won't be as nice as mine. Those assumptions just set us up for disappointment, for resentment, for anger. I cannot help but relate kind of this situation to everyone's journey with Christ. You see, as I've told you before, I was born and raised in the church and consider myself fortunate for being so. But I was baptized there, did youth group, and have done a lot in the church and for the church over the years. So if one would say that my job is successfully completed as one day I go on to the resurrection, one would say that I've labored quite a bit for God, for this church. But that doesn't mean that my place in heaven will be better than someone else's. It just means I've worked longer, right? That God's saying that to you, all of you, you guys are equal in my eyes. On the flip side of that, if we know someone that just recently, maybe in their final breaths, came to know God, they would receive the same salvation, the same promise, the same hope that I have been given being born and raised in a church. And that truly is a wonderful gift. You see, to God, both of us should be paid the same. We both were willing to work for the same landowner and to receive the exact same pay that we agreed upon, and for that, we should be grateful. It shouldn't matter how much or when we get paid, or how much our pay is compared to someone else's. What should matter is God's enormous generosity. You see, what we get from God in this very parable that we read is a complete shift that we are not entirely comfortable with hearing or really dealing with in life. He said, we're always taught that things should be fair and equal. And to a point, that's true. It's right. You see, growing up as a kid, if there was just one cookie left in the cookie jar or one slice of cake left in the little cake pan, my mother would take it out and make me or my sister cut it in half. Then the other sibling would choose which half they wanted to eat. So I shouldn't cut a big half because I know my sister will take that side. So try to cut it right down the middle to make it fair and equal. And the same goes for our groups and our organizations that we belong to, or the organizations that we work for. But typically, if you're with a company for about 20 or 25 years, you've probably accrued maybe 5 or 6 weeks of annual vacation. So over those years, that time has kind of grown, where if you started, you had maybe 1 or 2. Well, what if the next day some hotshot comes in, has been working for the company for 2 weeks, and they give him 8 weeks of vacation? That assumption makes you feel pretty slighted and jaded, right? That's not fair. I've been here 20, 25 years dedicating my time to this company. And here comes Johnny Hotshot. Gets 8 weeks, 2 days on the job. How does that work? You see, we're conditioned to expect fairness and balance in our life. But that can be challenging to do when comparing kind of apples to apples. And so if we look at God as kind of the landowner of everything, then we are invited and challenged to look at where we see ourselves in this parable from Jesus Christ. You see, this parable reminds us that God is a very lousy bookkeeper and also a bad businessman, right? He is inviting and encouraging us to transform our pride, our envy, our hardness into a joy by admiring and celebrating God's astounding generosity. And that's just it. What today's parable really calls us to do is to look at ourselves, both lovingly and forgivingly. To know that, yeah, we make mistakes, but we can continue to grow and to learn and to maybe change our ways. There's always room to improve and alter the way we think or feel about the world. But at the end of the day, we have to be grateful for God's generosity. We should be celebrating, not lamenting the fact that others may receive salvation too, from the same God that has freely given it to us. For those that have known Him since birth, and for those that maybe come to know God when they're 95 years old. A fairness should not be at the table at this point, and it shouldn't be a focal point of this. And what should be focused on is the immense generosity of God, that He's bestowed upon us and given to us, that we remember that Christ died on the cross while we were still sinners. We didn't do anything to earn or deserve that. But God's saying, I don't care. Here you go anyway. It's yours for the taking. I wonder, though, if somehow God's generosity has maybe spoiled us in some ways. And so we all know that child or two that reaches that point of being spoiled, where they get everything they want really in life and nothing ever seems to go wrong for them. They get a toy, though, and they complain it's not big enough. They get a doll and say it's not pretty enough, or its hair is not frizzy or curly enough. They get a sports car and say, oh, it's not really fast enough for me. You see, gratitude and gratefulness just seems to escape their minds, and they come to expect it. Are we maybe in the same boat when it comes to God's generosity? We just expect it and don't realize it's there or how much really has been given to us. But what were to happen if we were to flip that situation around? What if we were the person that met God on our last breath? What if we were the last worker that was hired that day on that nice, hot, sunny day out in the wilderness? We've struggled for months on end to find a job, to no avail. Rent is coming due, the storage of food in our pantry is running dry, and we're running out of options and being pushed to desperation. Would we then be envious of the landowner's wonderful generosity? Or would we be grateful? See, Jesus isn't talking about idleness, nor is He lifting up fairness. But Jesus is teaching us about God's generosity. And our right response to God's grace, God's justice, and God's unrelenting goodness should not be envy, but gratitude. We have to be grateful for what God has so generously given us and done for us. In doing so, we seek to celebrate the generosity of ourselves and for others. And in doing so, we seek to drive out the spoiledness and assumptions that taint our joy that we may carry on in life. Besides, who's ever been known to complain about someone that's generous? You know, even those football players or coaches that have given millions of dollars to hurricane relief funds. Who's ever complained about that generosity? Said, oh, well, look at those jerks, giving $1 million to people that need help. Who does that? Nobody complains about generosity. but we should be grateful for it in whatever way we receive it. You see, we all need to shed the envy, the assumptions, the resentment, the disappointment that may bring us down in life. Because all it causes us to do is think about the negative. Think about what someone has that we don't. Think about how someone's better and we're not. Shedding that, we realize how generous God really is. So whether we're 2 or 102, God is saying, I love you all the same. And all of you are welcome into my kingdom. Through my Son, Jesus Christ, who died for you while you were still sinners. Amen.